rest of his life, he had a special warm feeling for kitchens, and those peculiar sounds and smells that seemed somehow to combine into a bustling seriousness that had to do with love and food and comfort and security and, above all, home. No matter how high Garrion rose in life, he never forgot that all of his memories began in that kitchen.
Welcome to Bibliophiles Anonymous, episode 27. I'm Denise.
And I'm Jess.
And welcome to our Eddingspalooza!
Yay!
It's gonna be fun.
Yes, I'm ridiculously excited by this prospect.
Yeah, we're gonna really just enjoy the heck out of these books because, in case you haven't noticed, we're kind of fans.
A little bit.
Just a tiny bit.
Yeah.
So, we're going to have a lot of good discussion, talking about our favorite parts, the characters we like, the characters that drive us crazy, and we might just have a special surprise. Maybe. In the form of possibly a really, really cool giveaway. But more about that probably on our next episode. I'm working on a couple things, so I will keep you guys up to date on that. But before we get started, let's go ahead and talk about other things that we're reading, or what's on our current nightstand.
What's in the pile on my nightstand?
What's in the pile? Yeah.
Right now, well, I finished Pawn of Prophecy today, so that one's not in there anymore. It's going to be replaced with Queen of Sorcery.
Of course.
But Prophecy is still there because I haven't actually read much of it because I've been kind of busy, steam cleaning every carpet in the house.
Oh, well.
And planning a birthday party for a 2-year-old.
Oh, fun.
So, I've been kind of busy, hadn't done a lot of reading.
Yeah. I haven't done a whole lot either. I mean, I picked up Pawn of Prophecy, obviously, and I finally, and this made me really, really happy, I finally started back reading Abortion.
Yay!
So, yeah, I had to start over again because I'd only read maybe 2 chapters in before I had to stop and try and rush through Rhapsody really fast.
Yeah.
And so I sort of kind of remembered something, but I needed to go back and redo it, which is good because there was like a major thing I completely forgot about, and I was like, oh, crap. Okay. Yeah, remember, I think I mentioned to you that it starts off with a bang, almost literally. Yeah, it's the beginning, the very first chapter, it's almost like a prologue, but the very first one, all of a sudden, is like this big, huge, major thing right in your face, and you just kind of rock back and go, whoa, well, that was something.
That happened.
So, yeah, if that's how he starts the book, I'm really looking forward to the rest of it, because he's not pulling any punches here.
Yeah. I think once we get through this Eddings stuff, I'm going to try to read Fire by Christian Kishore.
Uh-huh.
Because I really, 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 really enjoyed Graceling.
Yes, it was very good.
And it kind of goes with my read stuff that's been on my shelf for a while thing. Because I do own that one and have owned it for a while.
Okay, well, that counts.
Really need to get back onto that. So that's probably next up on my list.
Yeah, that one's in my stack too. It's further down because there's a couple of others I really want to read. There's another book though that I just got this past week that, okay, since I just got it and I have a whole bunch of other books that I've had for longer that I really need to read, this one might have to move up a little bit because it just came out this week and it's the 4th book of Diane Sylvan's Shadow World series. And I have been wanting this book really, really, really badly. Like, as soon as I finished book 3, because huge, major, scary cliffhanger at the end of book 3.
Oh, you gotta love those.
Yeah, well, I pretty much read book 3 in one sitting, one day.
And see, you convinced me to get those when I went to McKay, and I got the first 3, and I don't have book 4. Or did I just get the first 2? I think I just got the first 2.
Yeah, well, like I said, book 4 was just came out on Tuesday, so you probably don't have that one. But it's called Of Shadow Born, and I may not be able to wait. But the problem is that it's been a while since I've read books 1 through 3, so I probably need to go back and reread those, and that's just, so I may hold off on it. But no, if you liked Chloe Neal's Chicagoland Vampires series, you'll like these. There's a couple of similarities there. It's not in Chicago. It's in Austin, Texas, which is also a pretty cool town. And the main character is a musician, actually.
See, I like musicians.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, she's a kind of a maybe Tori Amos kind of musician. She plays the guitar and she plays the piano. She's really cool. Her name's Miranda. But yeah, anyway, so that's there, and I really want to read it soon, but who knows when I'm going to get to it, because I still have 6, 7 other books that are also sitting over here glaring at me.
My entire bookshelf is glaring at me, so don't feel bad.
Oh well. Such is the life of a bibliophile. What can you do?
Read more books.
Yeah, and buy more books. And ignore the people who think you're crazy for doing so.
Yeah, do like me. Read 4 at a time. Why not?
I was for a while, and it was driving me insane. I couldn't keep track of anything.
It will make you crazy, definitely.
Yeah, and I was crazy to begin with, so. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started with the Belgariad.
Yeah. I found these books when I was 15, 14, something like that. I had read Lord of the Rings when I was 12-ish, I think. And a friend of mine was like, oh my God, you read Lord of the Rings, you have to read these books. They're so good. And at the time, she had only read the Belgariad. She hadn't read the Malloreon. But she was like, you have to read them, they're so good, yada yada, and told me about them. So I borrowed hers and read them. And I remember getting to the point where it was like, I only borrowed like 1 or 2 at a time. And when it got down to where I had finished book 4, I remember telling my mom, you have to take me to her house now. I have to have book 5 now. I need it desperately now. I need it yesterday. We got to go. Come on. So, I went and got the other book and finished it, and I fell in love. And since then, I have read them so many times. So many times. And nobody I knew other than my cousin had ever read these books. Which is what led me to the internet one day. I was at my aunt and uncle's house. It was before we had internet at my house. I live out in the sticks. So, we definitely didn't have DSL at the time. My aunt and uncle had dial-up, and I was at their house. I'd spent the night with them. And I was on the internet late at night. And I remember doing a Google search for David Eddings. I think it was David Eddings Trivia is what I actually searched for. And I found this website called the Malloreon Tavern. Which I'm sure you have all heard us mention just once or twice.
An episode.
Yeah. So, I browsed around and I signed up. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yep.
Here we are. I'm now one of the admins on the site. It has been through 2 or 3 different web hosts. It's crashed a few times. We call that the tavern burned down.
Yeah, we had to rebuild.
It's done that a few times. Yeah, we had to rebuild. And the last time that we started having problems, we decided, you know what, we're just going to upgrade to completely new software because they don't support the forum software we've used for years and years anymore. They don't make it. We're just going to completely upgrade and overhaul and start from scratch, basically.
Yeah, and it's worked great so far.
Yeah, we haven't really had any problems with it, other than it occasionally gets kind of ridiculous when, like, at one time, none of my, like, we have the what you see is what you get editor on the quick reply post. My what you see is what you get didn't work anymore. It wasn't there. It disappeared. But it fixed itself, so anyway.
Well, my Eddings story is a little bit different, because Eddings was the first fantasy series I ever read. And I had always kind of wanted to read fantasy, but at the time I really wasn't reading a whole lot. And so I was at the mall, and this was back when our mall had a Walden Books, which I miss
Walden Books.
They don't even exist anymore, and that makes me sad. But I was in there, and I was just kind of wandering around. I think my parents were maybe with me, or no, because I was older. I was my early 20s, I guess, and I don't even remember who I was with. It might have been my husband at the time. It might have been my parents. I don't remember, but somebody else was in another store, and I just wandered into the bookstore, and I was looking, and I came across Pawn of Prophecy, and I looked at it and I saw, okay, it's book 1 of a series, so that's a good place to start. I read the back. It sounded kind of interesting, so I said, yeah, what the heck, I'll get it. It's not a big deal. And then I read the book in one sitting, and I remember putting the book down and saying, this is so different from anything I've ever read before. And now I know now that it's not that original, really. I mean, there's so many different tropes that are found in it, because a lot of fantasy kind of regurgitates the same stuff over and over. But there were also so many fun and interesting characters that you just couldn't help but just getting swept up into it. And so I had to rush out again. Now, at the time, I had like no money at all. And my library, the one library we had, they were really, really bad. They didn't have hardly anything, so they didn't have them. And so I ran back out to the store, the bookstore, one of the bookstores, I don't remember which one, and got the next one. And read through that one really fast. It was even better. And I ended up having to buy all of these books. Well, I didn't have to, but, you know.
With Bibliophiles, yes.
Really,
you had to.
really, really wanted to. And so I just bought the last 3. Just kind of snuck them in the house. I was like, you know, don't tell anybody I'm buying all these books. and I just loved them. And I didn't have anybody to talk to about them, because my husband didn't really read a lot of books, and I tried to get my mom to read them, and eventually she did, but I don't remember if she finished the series or not. I don't think she finished them. I know she started, but I don't think she finished. And so, like you, I decided to get on the internet, and I found the tavern. And I had several different usernames on there, and I spent most of the time lurking because I had never really done a whole lot on the internet, so I was, and I'm still a little bit shy anyway, but I just didn't really know how to talk to people in all these forums and stuff, so I didn't really do anything. I kind of read through other people's stuff and kind of got to know a couple of people, and then, you know, eventually I just started talking to some of the people there and met you and met a whole bunch of other people and survived various fires at the tavern, and now I'm a moderator in the Great Hall Forum, which is where we do our book of the month and everything else. So yeah, that's my Eddings story. And
yeah,
and
you know, we met on the tavern, so these books are sort of indirectly responsible for this podcast.
Well, I would say so. You can draw
actually, they're kind of directly responsible.
Yeah, you can draw a straight line between when we found these books to today and doing the podcast, because without these books, we would never have met.
No.
You know, there would have been no reason to.
We never. But and see, I remember on the tavern when you were pregnant and trying to figure out what to name the baby.
Mhm. Yep, that was one.
And the fact that she's, you know,
8 years
as old as she is, yeah, just baffles me.
Oh, she baffles you. You don't have to see her running around all the time. She keeps getting tall. I told her to stop doing that. She won't listen. She's up to my chin now, okay? And she's 8.
Wow.
Makes me sad.
Well, don't feel bad. The 2-year-old that I'm planning a birthday party for, she's wearing 4T clothes.
Whoa, she's tall.
Yeah. She's the size of a 4-year-old.
Wow.
She's adorable, but she's very tall, and which is weird because her mother is like 5'2".
Well, see, I'm 5'2" if I'm lucky.
And
but her dad was really tall, so that's where she.
Well, Ellie's dad is like 6 feet at least.
Yeah.
But Jenny's 5'2", so Ellie like comes above Jenny's hip.
Yeah. Well, I already know that Ashley's gonna be taller than me when she's in middle school, and you know, we'll just have to deal with that when it gets there. But yes, I turned to the tavern for baby names because at the time I had no idea. I got some good suggestions too, but I don't think I used any of them.
But yeah, that's sort of how this podcast came about. Is we both read Eddings, we both found the tavern, and now here we are.
Here we are.
And tonight, we're going to talk about Pawn of Prophecy.
Mm-hmm. Book 1.
Book 1, yes. Which I recently replaced my entire set of the Belgariad. Which I really needed to replace my Pawn of Prophecy because it was my 3rd copy and it was falling apart. So that should tell you something about how much I read these books. Granted, all of them were used when I bought them. So they didn't start out in, pristine condition.
Right.
But still, I killed 3 copies. And I was in the Goodwill store. And I found, I think it was book 1 and book 3 were together on the shelf. And I was like, okay, well, I know I'm buying Pawn of Prophecy because I need that one. I was like, but this is book 1 and book 3. I wonder if the rest of them are here. And I kept looking, and eventually I found all 5 of them on the shelf. They're all brand new. They'd never been read. The spines weren't creased, nothing. And I gave a whole $2.50 for the entire set. So, naturally, even though I didn't really need them, I bought the entire set.
That's cool.
And, yeah. And I just finished Pawn of Prophecy today, and it's one of those things that no matter how many times I read it, I still love it to pieces.
Yep.
I mean, it does kind of start off slow. The action doesn't really pick up till the end of chapter 5.
Well, this time when I went through, and I haven't done this really in a long time, but I went through and I just started taking notes of just the different little things that happened in each chapter, because there were a couple things I knew I wanted to talk about, but there were a couple of other things that I knew I was going to forget because they're good things, but they're not like really important things.
Yeah.
But even in the first one, in the very first chapter, we meet Garion, who is a young boy growing up in the kingdom of Sindaria, living on a farm with his aunt, Paul. And even though it seems like he has this very idyllic childhood, growing up mostly outside with his friends and running through the fields and going rafting on the river, or the little lake there. But in the very first chapter, you know that he's being watched by this, man in a dark cloak on a horse. And nobody else seems to be able to see this man. And later you find out that every time Garion tries to either think about him or talk about him, he can't.
Yeah, it's like something won't let him.
Yeah, because there comes a point towards the end of the book where he really wants to talk about it and he can't until some other people start talking about it, and then he kind of is able to fight through it, sort of. But all of that happens in the first chapter. You have this very dark, mysterious person that's watching over this little boy growing up. And before that, you get, in a prologue, you get this history of the kingdoms of Eloria and the gods, and specifically about Torak.
Yes.
Who is our big bad for the series. And
yeah,
Torak,
he's something else.
He's a nasty piece of work is what he is.
This is true.
But one of the gods, Aldur, he found this stone and he shaped it and molded it and created the orb. And Torak saw it and he wanted it. And Aldur says, no, this orb is very precious, it's very special, and it's very powerful, and it's mine, so you can't have it. Well, Torak was having none of that, so he strikes Aldur and takes the orb away. And, of course, this leads to a big, huge war, which nearly destroys the whole world.
Well, that's because Torak decides to crack the world.
Well, yeah. And he also manages to completely destroy half of his body, because the orb didn't really like being used like that.
Yeah, it had definite. That's one thing that I wish there had been more of in the book, like later on.
Mm-hmm.
Is the orb had a definite personality.
Oh yeah.
And I wish there had been more of that shown in the books, because it amused me when Garion would tell the orb to stop doing things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you almost wanted to have a chapter, or even like a short story, like a supplemental short story, from the orb's point of view.
Yeah.
I think that would be hilarious. And if David Eddings was still alive, I'd send him a letter and say, hey, can you just do that? Because that would be awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I remember, I think it's at one point, Garion tells somebody it's kind of like a puppy. But yeah, it starts off, I mean, you get that in the first chapter, but then a lot of the first several chapters it's world building, which David Eddings isn't quite as tedious as some people when it comes to that. He does it a lot more subtly.
Well, he does it a lot more subtly, but it's still a very, very rich story world.
Yeah, it really is. But a lot of it is, developing the character of Garion mostly. Mm-hmm. Because it goes from when he's very small to when he's, about 14?
Yes.
In the first book. So he's about 14.
Yeah, because he's 16 by the end of it.
Yeah. He, it talks about his life on the farm and his friends and things that he got into. Like, there ends up being a running joke through the series about Garion hitting his head.
Yeah, he does do that a lot.
He does it twice in the first book.
And really, that might explain a few things. If you want to be completely honest about it. I mean, I love Garion. He's a wonderful character, and he's just cute as a button. But he is really, really good at not wanting to see things that he doesn't want to see.
Yeah.
And he's incredibly stubborn in that way.
And convincing himself that it's not possible.
Yes, they have several discussions about what it means for something to be possible or impossible, and how do you know something's impossible, and what makes it impossible.
Yeah.
And a lot of it breaks down to how do you know if you don't try.
Yeah.
And which, is kind of an important message too, if you think about it.
But these first 5 chapters they set up Garion and give you a lot about who Garion is and how he's raised, and introduces a lot of characters actually that are quite important, like Garion and Paul and Dernick and Old Wolf and Bierle and Barrack and Silk.
Yes. So starting off with a couple of those, Paul is his aunt, and she lives with him on the farm and is the cook for the farm. And there's this man who comes around every once in a while, and they call him the storyteller because he's an amazing storyteller. And Paul calls him Old Wolf. So at one point, Garion asks what his name is, and he said, "Oh, well, I've had many names." And Garion says, "Well, if Paul calls you Old Wolf, can I call you Mr. Wolf?" Which I still to this day think is just adorable.
Yes.
I just think that that's so cute. And Wolf decides that that's pretty adorable too. It's like, yes, absolutely. But yeah, the way that they just drop things in that become more important later. For example, Bierle, you mentioned him. He's a hired hand on the farm, and a rather unpleasant and very fragrant fellow.
Because he doesn't like to bathe.
No. And you find out later as they're going on their journey that he's following them and some sort of a spy. But you don't know at this point that he's actually a lot more powerful than you think he is. Yeah. And we're not going to go into that until we get to it. But Wolf is set up as being this very happy-go-lucky, fun kind of guy. And everybody is excited when he shows up, except for Paul, because she knows that he's going to be trying to steal food and steal beer and everything else. So she's always kind of like, oh, geez, here he is again. But everybody else is like, yay, here he is again.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
especially Garion. Garion really likes him.
Yeah. Well, who wouldn't? I mean, he's like a party just waiting to happen. But then one time, Wolf shows up and he's not happy. And he's very serious, which Garion is like, wow, what happened here? This is important. And that's when you first find out that there's a big problem that somebody is going to have to go and fix.
Mm-hmm. Something was stolen.
Something was stolen. We don't know what. Something important. And while they're talking about it, they're also very specifically not talking about it.
Yeah, they're not naming anything.
Right.
And Garion, of course, has this unsavory habit of eavesdropping.
He does that a lot.
Which you can't blame him because nobody tells him anything.
This is true. If I was in his shoes, I'd do the same thing.
And I can sympathize with that, because many times I've been, nobody tells me anything.
Mm-hmm.
So he finds out, he's sort of eavesdropping, and Wolf is telling Paul that we have to go now.
We have to
And
find this thing.
And he's like, we'll leave the boy here, he'll be fine. And she's like, no, we're not leaving him here because he was caught in a hay barn with a girl.
Yeah.
And
I love that that's the reason. Not that she's worried about anybody finding him, or like, because they had some issues with some of the Murgos that were hanging around and asking too many questions. It's not, well, he may not be as safe here as you think. It's like, he was hanging out with a girl, and we might come back here and find him a married farmer, and we don't want that.
Yeah, because bad thing. Because and this is where you start to kind of realize that Garion is very important. Because they're talking about if he stays here and gets married and has kids and is a farmer, who knows how long we'll have to wait for circumstances to be right again. And that's sort of your first big clue that Garion is important.
Yeah. Although Garion doesn't really quite realize that.
He's sort of confused by it all.
Well, he's also a 14-year-old little boy.
This is true. So they just basically up and leave. Of course, Garion, in his eavesdropping, manages to catch Bierle eavesdropping on Paul when she goes to tell Faldor that they're leaving. And when he tells him about this, Wolf goes to confront Bierle and finds out that Bierle is carrying a purse full of red gold. And that's Angarak gold. Something in the ground in the Angarak kingdoms makes the gold red. And that's your first clue that Bierle is not exactly what he appears to be.
Right.
So,
and we should explain really quick here that you have basically two major sides and then a couple of smaller ones. You have the Alorns, which is a group of countries. They all used to be one country. They all used to be Eloria, but now they've broken into Cherik, Drasnia, Algaria, and Riva.
Mm-hmm.
And Sindar is, that's not really part of the Alorans, but they're very friendly neighbors. And then you have the Angaraks, which are your Murgos, your Thulls, your Nadraks, and your Malorians, but you don't meet any Malorians until later.
Yeah, they're not important until, the Malorian.
Yeah. And the Angaraks are the people who worship Torak. As we said, he's the big bad. So you have all these other gods that are over all the other countries. All of the Alorans worship Belar. And then you also have Tolnedra and Arendia and the one that I can never pronounce right, Nyissa. And that's all of them, isn't it? No, there's Ulgo.
Yes.
Which will travel to all of these at one point or another. But you know that basically all of the Angaraks are going to be trouble. And
yeah, because they're the followers of Torak, and Torak is our big bad.
Yes. So when there's a couple of hints that there's Murgos around, and they're kind of looking around for somebody, and you don't know who, but eventually you realize that it's Garion and Paul, for that matter. But they head out onto the road, and that's when you find two of my favorite characters, and that is Beric and Silk.
I love those two, especially Silk.
Yes. And they are the funniest because they are such opposites. And Beric he's a Cherik, and when you think Cheriks, you're going to think like Vikings. Or at least that's how I always pictured them.
Yeah.
They're a seafaring country. They're very big, and like he always has like the braids and the beard, and he's a massive red-haired man.
Yeah.
So I always think of Vikings. And then you have Silk, who is a smaller, slighter, weaselly-looking man, if you will. He hates being called a weasel, but he looks kind of like a weasel. But they're part of this group, and Garion doesn't realize that at first. He thinks they're being attacked, but Then he finds
Yes,
out,
and
nope,
runs
they're
away.
actually friends. They're actually friends. It's okay.
Yeah, they meet him after they leave Faldor's. They are traveling and they meet him in the woods, and Garion immediately, because Barrack is so huge and hulking and intimidating, thinks they're robbers and screams and runs away like a little girl.
Well, I mean, I don't remember which one of them said it, but I mean, they did have a point when they said until he learns, properly how to fight and defend himself, he has this little dagger, but that's not really going to do anything against people like us. So until he really learns, his feet are his best friend. He needs to know how to run away and hide and stuff, because right now he's this little runt with a little teeny tiny kitchen knife that's trying to stab us, and it's not working. So he needs to go run and hide. And I would be a little bit scared too, I mean, if you think about it. But the thing about Barrack that I absolutely love is that he's this huge, hulking man, but he's the biggest teddy bear. He
really is.
He is the nicest, sweetest guy. Now, don't make him angry.
No, because you don't want to get on his bad side.
Because he will hurt you.
Very much so.
Yeah.
He's a very fierce fighter. He's, he can be, like I said, intimidating.
Yeah. So, to reduce a lot of this, they spend a good portion of their time traveling around the kingdom of Sandaria, looking to find clues for whatever it is they're looking for. And you still don't exactly know. You know that there was a thief who stole something, and that's it. And
yeah, because, they don't want to mention the name of the thief because they were afraid that, he'll figure out that they're after him. And they don't want to speak the name of the thing he stole.
Right. But they go to all the major towns in Sandaria trying to find traces of the thief. And they finally find it, but not after wasting a lot of time. This is the part that's kind of slow. But at the same time, you are getting to know these characters and you're getting to know the story world, because as they're talking about, things about the Cherriks and things about the Drasnians, since we're traveling with two of those now. And, you're learning more about how Garion sees it, because Garion's never left the farm. So everything to him is brand new. And,
right.
He's never... He took a trip with Wolf to the closest village, and it was like an adventure because he had literally never left this one little patch of land. So you're kind of get to go on this adventure and see this whole country because it's brand new through his eyes as well.
Right. And I think that's one reason why it's such a much better example of world building, because a lot of it is not done just through exposition. It's not, a lot of it is, dialogue between the characters that gives a lot of this backstory.
Right.
For instance, when they're in Muros, I think, is where Brendig apprehends them. They're in this inn, and Brendig has, apprehended them because the king of the Sindars wants to see Mr. Wolf.
Right, and Brendig is one of his captains, so they're taken into custody, sort of.
Sort of. They're not arrested. It's just sort of a firm invitation.
Yeah, although Garion's really nervous about this whole thing because he keeps thinking they're going to get thrown in a dungeon.
Yeah. But, you find out a lot of the history of the Kingdom of Sandaria there because Silk's explaining it to Garion.
Right. And that is a funny scene because Silk is a little bit irritated, but he decides to spend the time kind of making fun of the Senders.
Yeah.
In order to really annoy the crap out of Brendig. And so he's talking about, Sandaria became a kingdom because the Tolnedrins wanted this area to be secure, and so they held an election, and there were thousands of candidates. And you hear Brendig, actually, there were 740 something.
743.
And, yeah. And they finally elected a rutabaga farmer. And Brendig's all like, he didn't just grow rutabagas. And Silk's all, of course, he also grew cabbages. You're right. I forgot about the cabbages. The whole time he's just, making these little digs, and it's hilarious. And he's playing this role of, I'm just a simple man making my way through the world, so I'm not as learned as you are. And so it's hard to be angry at him. At the same time, Brendig is like ready to punch him in the face.
Yes, it's a great scene. It really is.
I absolutely love that part.
you get the history, but it's not completely boring history.
Right.
You know, it's done in a way that makes it interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And you find out that that's why, you know, the Sindars they're a combination of all of the races in that area. The Arryns, the Cherok's, the Drasnians. People could have any sort of heritage.
Right.
And live in Cinderia. And another thing we're told is they're very practical.
Extremely. Very sensible.
You know, and Garyon was raised as a Sindar, so, and because of Dernick, he sort of gets that strict practicality, and that's part of his problem, because it's like, well, that's not possible, that can't be.
Right.
I think that's kind of why he has that streak in him that doesn't want to believe things that are out of the ordinary.
That's very true, I would think. And he's having a really hard time of it right now, because they're taken to the king of Cindaria, and all of a sudden you realize that King Fulrak knows Wolf and knows Aunt Paul, and Garyon's grown up thinking that these were simple people. You know, Paul is a wonderful woman, but she's just a cook in a farm. And, you know, Wolf is this vagabond that just roams the countryside telling stories. No, they are well known with the king. And Garyon kind of has this, what in the world is going on moment at that point, because he's thinking that they're being arrested and getting ready to be thrown in jail because maybe Wolf was a criminal in some way. He could easily think that Wolf was a criminal or had done something wrong. But the fact that he was some sort of confidant or something to the king, he's like, what in the world is going on here? And it gets even worse when they decide to go up to Cherrick, to Valalorn, and meet the entire leadership of the Alorns. You have every single king. You have Anheg of Cherrick, you have Rodar of Drasny, you have Chohug of Algaria, and you have Brand, the Riven Warder. And all of them know Wolf and know Aunt Paul, and Garyon is now really dumbfounded.
And on top of that, he finds out that Silk and Barrack are not who he thought they were either.
No, he thought that they were also common people. But Silk is the nephew of the King of Drasnia. So he's a prince, I think third in line to the throne or something like that.
Yeah.
And Barrack is the cousin of the King of Cherrick.
He's the Earl of Trailheim.
Yeah. And Garyon's like, why didn't you say something? And like, well, we didn't think it would matter. And Garyon's like, it would matter. It's important.
And then he hears somebody call Old Wolf Belgarath.
Yep. And that's when his whole world starts falling apart a little bit.
Right. And they call Aunt Paul Polgara. And you get this in the intro, the prologue. It mentions Belgarath and Polgara, how Belgarath is a sorcerer, the eternal man, and Polgara is his daughter, and she's a sorceress. So you know that they're important people.
Yeah, and you also know that Belgarath is a disciple of Aldor.
Yes. And that he's a disreputable scoundrel. But anyway.
And is like 7,000 years old.
Right. But Garyon hears them call Belgarath and Polgara, and his world literally crashes around his ears.
Well, I just felt really bad for him.
Well, I did too, because, here he is, his parents are dead, and he's been raised by Polgara, and, he thinks she's actually his aunt. Which, I mean, she is, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. Right. He thinks that she was the sister of his brother, or sister of his father or his mother. And when he hears them call her Polgara, he realizes that that's not possible, because if she really is Polgara, then she's like 5,000 years old.
Right. And so she was the one, like, cornerstone of his life. She was his family, the only family that he had. And all of a sudden, he's been pulled into this crazy whirlwind trip where nobody seems to be who they say they are. And now the center of his life may not be related to him at all. So he just feels completely adrift. And if you put that together with the fact that he and Silk had a conversation on the road about how he didn't think Garyon was a sender.
Yeah.
that he was like, no, I know what Sendars look like, and you don't look like a Sendar. And Garion's like, no, I am. That's what I've always been told anyway. And Silk's like, I don't think so. And so Garion's having a rough time of it.
Yeah, and this is what leads him to start sort of rebelling.
Yes.
And which is, all things considered, he doesn't really rebel that bad.
No. He decides sort of, to go boar hunting.
And almost, and this is the second time he hits his head in the book.
So that didn't go real well. Although he does start overhearing, because he eavesdrops a lot because nobody will tell him anything. But while he's in Cherrick, he keeps seeing this man wearing a green cloak and acting very suspicious. And he overhears the man talking to somebody in the woods, and he also sees the man talking to a Murgo, and has that kind of weird tingling feeling that he knows the Murgo, and that it's this fellow, we met him previously, named Asherak, who is the same guy on a horse who had been watching over him. He recognized him. But again, he wasn't able to talk about it.
Right, because he has this strange compulsion to keep his mouth shut about it. And then, that he sees the man in the green. He gets left out of they're having counsel while they're in Cherrick. They're meeting and discussing things, and finally they invite Dernick to their council. And Garion feels left out because they didn't invite him. So he goes wandering around the palace, and he finds some footsteps in a place where the roof is collapsed in, and there's snow. So he decides to follow it, and he sees the man in the green cloak, and he finds out that he can overhear everything that's being said in their council. And
which is not a good thing.
No, he finally realizes that, this is important, and he should probably tell somebody.
Right.
So he goes to Barrack, who's not in the council, because he's pouting, because when Garion hurt himself with the boar hunting, when he was in danger, Barrack turned into a bear.
Yes. And he thought that it had been prophesied when he was born that he was going to have this doom, and he was going to be turned into a beast. And so he's like, it's come, it's happened, I don't even know if I'm dangerous or what's going to happen to me, but my doom is here, and, that's pretty much the end for me. And Garion's like, you need to get over that, we got a problem here. And they decide that the man that this guy in the green cloak was meeting with was the Earl of Jarvik, who had been banished because he was spying before for the Murgos.
Yeah, he got caught with a message.
Yeah. And I think
he tried to deny was his, even though his seal was on it.
Right. And so they burst into the council and say that this has happened, and they send out soldiers to go and find either the man with the green cloak or the Earl or somebody.
And when Garion's telling this is when you realize, this is when they finally break his compulsion to not speak of Asherak.
Right.
Because he's trying to talk about it, and he can't say anything, and they're like, is it perhaps, I think it's Silk that speaks up, is it perhaps because you know this Murgo? And Garion just kind of nods his head, and Silk says, okay, well, you wouldn't have met that many, so was it Asherak? And Garion kind of nods his head again, and that's when they realize that he has this compulsion against speaking. And Polgara breaks it and tells him to go back to his room, which doesn't work out too well.
No. There's a whole bunch of soldiers, and
Asherak.
And Asherak, yeah. So, and Asherak now realizes that the compulsion has been broken, and he's none too happy about it, and he's like, well, that's okay, I can just do it again. And Garion takes off running, and ends up getting lost. And the problem is that Asherak has soldiers, and these are all Alorns that he has bribed. They're not Murgos. So he has soldiers, and then Anheg has soldiers that are filling the castle, that are looking for the other soldiers. So Garion's like, I don't know who's a friend, who's an enemy, or I don't know what's going on. And, well, he panics, and I think rightfully so.
Yeah.
I probably would. And he ends up hiding kind of above the council chamber in a way, and they're able to...
No, he ends up above the throne room.
Oh, the throne room, that's right. I remember he was above something, and then they had to try and figure out a way to get it out. And there's all these secret tunnels that were up there, and that's where he got kind of lost and twisted around, but he is able to tell them where he is, and they're able to kind of guide him to the end of it, and then he sees some soldiers that he knows, and he's like, oh, thank goodness. All right, I'm safe again.
Well, and of course, Polgara's like, I thought I told you to go to your room. And he's like, but Asherak was in my room. And Grand is like, well, you can't really argue with him there, Polgara. I think if there was a Grolan priest in my room, I would run away too.
Yes, as would I.
And that's not long after that. They leave Cherrick, and they're going to meet up. Where is it they're going to meet up after that? Kamar, maybe?
I thought they were going down to Arindia.
Maybe that was it.
Because they're going to meet up with Leldoran in the first book. In the second book, I mean.
That's right. They're going to the ruins of Owakun. That's kind of where this book ends. They're leaving on this voyage, and Garion's talking to his grandfather. And his grandfather finally explains a little bit more about what happened to his parents.
Well, the thing too is, which I think was really, really sweet, is because as Garion started feeling more and more distant from Paul, Wolf finally takes him aside and starts explaining a couple things to him. He was like, she can't be my aunt because I thought she was my father's sister, and if she's hundreds and thousands of years old, then that can't happen. That's impossible. And Wolf is all about, okay, this impossible thing, remember we talked about that? You shouldn't just discount things as impossible. And so Wolf explains that, yes, Polgara is your aunt, but she's more like the sister of your father's great-great-grandmother or something like that. So Garion's
ultimate
like,
grandmother.
Yeah, like many, many greats. And so Garion's like, okay, so she is my aunt, sort of. My distant aunt, but she's still my aunt. And Wolf is like, yeah, exactly. So it's fine. She's not like your direct aunt like that, but she's still family. So you don't have to feel distant. She's still your family. She still loves you, and everything's good. And then all of a sudden, Garion just thinks for a second, and he's like, so she's my aunt, and you're her father, then that kind of makes you my grandfather.
Yeah.
And it was so sweet because he's like, well, okay, yeah, I guess I'm your grandfather. And, Garion gets kind of emotional because he was feeling like he had no family left at all. And then not only does he get his aunt back, but he gains a grandfather with this man that he, already really cared about. So it was just so sweet, It was like, oh, warm fuzzy.
Yeah. And that's when he, explains to Garion that his parents died in a fire, that his family had enemies. And Garion's like, you're not telling me everything. And he's like, no, I'm not. I'm telling you what it's safe for you to know. Which, I don't know why Polgara couldn't just do that. Instead of being like, you don't need to know, stop asking questions.
Because Polgara is a control freak.
Well, this is true.
Very much so.
And this is, now that we have sort of reached the end of the plot here, I have to mention, this book is what started the Eddings Inconsistencies thread at the tavern. I love these books. I do. And I've read them so many times. And when you've read them that many times, that's when the inconsistencies really sort of become glaring.
Yeah.
And one of the main ones that I discovered, again, another aspect of today, when Garion and Belgarath visit Upper Grault and run into the Murgo, they come back, Garion's kind of half asleep, and Polgara's like, was he an ordinary Murgo or was he a Grolam? And Belgarath says, I don't know, even I can't tell the difference. And you kind of get the impression of, once you know that he's Belgarath, you think, well, he's the eternal man, he's the most powerful sorcerer that ever lived. If he can't do it, nobody can. But then 5 chapters later, they're stopped on the side of the road to let a party of Murgos pass by, and Polgara calmly, oh, it's 5 Murgos and a Grolam. And I'm like, okay, but Belgarath said it was impossible to tell the difference. And then, just 1 chapter after that, I believe they're in Cherrick. Somebody says, there's somebody watching us from that window, and Belgarath identifies this unseen person as a Grolam. I'm like, but you said at the beginning of the book that
you couldn't do it.
You can't do that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of them, and for the most part, I just ignore it.
Yeah, because, I usually do too.
Because there's the one where, towards the beginning of it, where Polgara is talking to Belgarath, and she says something about, I'm not suited for this. What do I know about raising young boys? And she's referring to Garion. But you find out later that she's been looking over are watching after, Garion's father and his grandfather and all the way back to, way back, and to Riva, really, and Riva's son. But she says, what do I know about raising boys? You must know something because you've been doing it for generations. And that same thing when Garion has his kind of revelation about Belgarath being his grandfather, and Belgarath gets he's kind of like surprised. He's like, yeah, I guess I am your grandfather. That's kind of cool. He says it like it hadn't really occurred to him.
Yeah.
But then I think it's probably in Belgarath the Sorcerer. He talks about his grandsons.
Right.
All of his grandsons. And so it's like, no,
this long line of serious sandy-haired little boys. Yeah,
grandsons. And so it's like, you knew that was your grandson, so what's the deal? But like I said, at the same time, I just ignore them because I love the book so much. And we didn't even really get into some of the side stories. Like you have the story with Barak and his wife.
Right.
And they have a really bad relationship.
Yeah, I mean, he wanted her for so long, but her family, or she didn't want him, but then her family decided once he became the Earl of Trailheim that, it would be beneficial to their family if she were to marry someone with a title like that. So,
yeah.
And they're both kind of miserable because of it. And a part of it is because Meryl constantly wants to throw duty in Barak's face, that it's her duty as his wife to do these things and yada, yada, yada. And she's very bitter, I guess, about being forced to marry him. But the good thing about that is later on she gets over it.
Yeah, she does.
And you sort of get a hint at that when she's in the room when Garion is telling Barak about the Earl of Jarvik and all of that.
Well, because she realizes that this is not a time to be petulant and a time to cop an attitude. This is something serious and something that could have severe consequences, so you need to set some stuff aside and just deal with it.
Yeah. And then there's the whole thing that you learn about Silk is, he's a thief and a merchant and an acrobat and all of these things.
And a spy.
And a spy. Well, all Drasnians are spies.
All Drasnians are spies. But he's one of the best.
That's another part of that, world building thing that you learn is that it's sort of the national industry of Drasnia is spying.
Mm-hmm. Collecting information.
They're all incredible sneaks.
Yep.
I mean, and they're all pretty much merchants as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they're everywhere in the world. Everywhere you go, you will find Drasnians.
Yeah.
And I think that's another reason it sort of confused Garen, because he knew Silk was a thief, he knew he was a merchant, and then to find out he's the prince of Drasnia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there's the whole thing with Porin.
Yeah.
Which is just sad.
Yes.
Porin is King Rodar's wife. And, of course, her and Silk are friends. And, I mean, technically she's his aunt, but I think they're about the same age, because...
Yeah. She was a lot younger than Rodar, and she was the second...
Yeah, he was
Rodar's second wife.
Right. And so you can tell whenever they're together that Silk has very strong feelings for her, which she doesn't return. I mean, she's very much in love with her husband and, I mean, has nothing but the utmost respect for Silk, but, she's not in love with him back, so Silk is not going to do anything because he also loves his uncle and isn't going to cause trouble. But it's also kind of this tragic thing because he wants to be around her, but doesn't want to be around her because it's hard, and it's sad. But it just adds that other bit of complexity to it, because you have this big, huge storyline, and it's easy to have all of these characters almost become caricatures, because you have your main character who's the reluctant hero, you have the wise old man, you have she's old, but you don't really think of her as old, you have the wise old woman, you have all of these kind of archetypes, but then Eddings takes them and gives them all something that just makes them more human.
Right.
Which I think is something that's hard to do and something that he does really, really well.
Yeah, he does. I mean, he distinguishes them all in some way. I mean, Barak has the trouble with his wife. Silk's in love with his aunt. They're all human. He makes them easier to relate to. They're not perfect. They're not...
But there's not a single perfect person in this book.
No, even Garion, his stubbornness and refusal to accept things that he doesn't think are possible, and later on, his refusal to do what he knows he needs to do because he doesn't want to.
He is stubborn as Knox, that one.
Of course, he's a lot like Belgariad.
Yeah, and Belgariad says so.
And even later on, when he gets older, they're like, you get more like Belgariad every day.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody tells him at one point, you can do more damage because you're irritated than most men could do in a towering rage.
Yeah, but anyway, so yeah, this book, there's a lot of important things that happen, but most of this book is just setup. It's introducing you to the world, it's introducing you to the characters, it's giving you an idea of some of the alliances, some of the politics of it all, and then pretty much just lets you know what you're in for. You're in for this big, epic, wild ride.
Yeah, like I said, it is just kind of slow at the beginning, but, it makes up for it when it finally does take off.
Oh, yeah. So I think that's probably all we're going to say about book 1, unless there's anything else you want to add.
No, can't think of anything.
Okay. Yeah, like we said, this is just the setting up for the great adventure that we're about to go on, and showing you this amazing world that we are going to travel all over. So definitely go out and get it and read it. Most libraries should have it. I don't know why mine didn't. I know mine does now.
Don't feel bad. My library still doesn't. The only Eddings book that library has is The Sapphire Rose.
Really?
Yes.
That's random.
Yeah, I found it very strange myself.
But anyway, so go and get it, and get started getting to know all of these people, because it's fun, and it's dealing with some serious things, but it's also, there's so much humor. Like, one of my favorite things, this is the last thing I'm going to say about it, one of my favorite little lines in this one, and I had completely forgotten about it, but when they go boar hunting, Garion, falls down, hits his head, and ends up unconscious, and then everybody's kind of fawning over him and giving him a lot of attention because he took down the boar, but he also, got hurt. And Belgarath comes in to talk to him, and he said, "Did it ever occur to you to just jump out of the way and run?" And Garion's like, well, that would be cowardly, wouldn't it? And Belgarath says to him, "Were you worried about what the boar was going to think of you?" And it's just...
Yeah.
And Garion's like, well, no.
Yeah, I love that.
And Polgara comes in, and she's like, yes, I'm sure the boar was very impressed. And it just, completely takes the wind out of his sails. He's just like, oh, fine. Yeah, okay, it was stupid. But it's just little things, these little flashes of humor. And as the books go on, there's even more of them. But there's so many good things in these books. And so I hope that we get as many people as possible to read them along with us and just enjoy the heck out of them as much as we do.
Yeah. I think Garion was probably the first fictional character I ever fell in love with, because you got to think, when I first read these, I was about Garion's age. Mm-hmm. I was 15 or 16 when I picked these up. So he was probably the first that I ever, fell in love with. I will always have a soft spot in my heart for Garion and these books, because I read them ridiculously often.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading them again, because it's been a little while since I've done it. So
I think year before last is when I read them last, because last year I read The Malorian. So
yeah. So I think that's going to do it for us then tonight.
I think that does it.
Right. So next week, obviously, we will be talking about book 2, which is Queen of Sorcery.
Yes.
And stay tuned for the surprise giveaway that we're going to have, and I'm hoping to announce that next week. So you'll have to just tune in and find out what that is.
Giveaways are fun.
Yeah, we had a good time with the last one. So anyway, so if you have anything that you would like to add to our discussion about either Pawn of Prophecy or anything that you want to say about the later books, and we can include that in our shows for those books as we go on, you can contact us in a couple different ways. You can email us at bibliophiles.podcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter. We are at BibAnonPodcast. And I was enjoying, just as I was typing up these notes, all of the different things that autocorrect was doing with the different names in David Eddings. So I just started posting them up on Twitter. And I think I retweeted a couple of them on our feed, but you can also follow us individually on Twitter if you wanted to. I'm at Life with No Plot, and Jess, you're at
Cirrus_of_Kel. Cirrus of Kel.
Yeah.
That name has been following me around the internet for 10 years now.
So anyway, you can find us on Twitter, and you can also leave comments at our official website, which is www.bibliophiles-anonymous.com. And if you like Eddings as much as we do, or even if you don't, but you want to find out more about it, you can always go to the tavern, just like we did many, many years ago.
Yeah.
And that website is www.maltavern.com, or Mal Tavern, basically.
Yeah. And we have other stuff we discuss too.
Other
about
books and movies and TV shows and lots of stuff.
Yeah, so if there's something you've read and you've never found anybody else that has read it, head to the tavern, post about it in the Great Hall.
Mm-hmm.
You never know, one of us might have read it. We read a lot.
There's a good chance you'll find somebody there that's read it. So if you want to talk about something that you've, read and loved, but you don't have anybody that you can talk to about it, come see us. Because there's a good chance one of us will have read it, or we're the type of people, if you talk it up really, 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 really good,
we'll go read it.
We'll go read it. I mean, that's how I ended up with this stack of 8 books sitting on my desk, glaring at me. So come see us at the tavern, come visit our website, email us, see us on Twitter. Lots of different ways that you can contact us. And
we're on YouTube too.
Oh, that's right. Yes. In case some people don't want to subscribe to us through iTunes, or it's harder for them to subscribe through iTunes, so you can find us on YouTube. So if you have a friend who doesn't do the podcast thing, you can find us over there too. And you can just do a search for Bibliophiles Anonymous and our episodes will pop up. And you can listen to that on any computer that has an internet browser, obviously, since it's just YouTube.
Right.
So I think that's it.
I think that'll do us for tonight. I'm looking forward to next week.
Yep, so please join us next week for Queen of Sorcery. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.